Yes, it's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Let's say hello to Erin Zaleski. How are you?
Well, thanks.
Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Anne Bagamari of the International New York Times.
Hello.
Busy week.
Busy week.
Busy week.
Busy week.
Busy week as well for Patrick Smith of the Africa Report.
Greetings.
What's the cover this week?
It's likely to be, what does Brexit mean for Africa?
What does Brexit mean for Africa?
Yeah.
I'll put the question to you in a moment. First, let's say hello to France 24 senior correspondent Claude Guibal, who...
What
what did I say?
France 24.
I said France 24, excuse me. We haven't poached you yet. France Inter, the flagship radio station for French public broadcasting. Many thanks for being with us. Your reactions on Facebook and Twitter are #WorldThisWeek. Last Friday, after a sleepless night, the continent watched agape as Britain counted the ballots, and as the pound dropped, the drama began.
The sun has risen on an independent United Kingdom.
I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
There can be no informal or formal talks about Great Britain's exit.
Not wasting any time means making sure that the notification by the British is done as quickly as possible.
You were fighting for the exit. The British people voted in favour of the exit. Why are you here?
I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Patrick Smith.
Yes.
What will you take away from this week?
Well, it was the week of meltdowns. It was a week of meltdown of a treaty, a 43-year-old treaty, in which less than 1% of the registered voters in Britain decided the fate of the whole country.
There's a 1 million vote difference.
Yes, but if you look at the figures, 36% of the registered voters voted for leaving the European Union, meaning a majority of registered voters, not the people who actually turned up at the polls, registered voters were either indifferent or against leaving the European Union. The whole of Scotland voted against leaving the European Union. The whole of London and much of the southeast voted, and Northern Ireland also voted against it. It creates huge problems. It creates the problems for the union of the United Kingdom, that Scotland and Northern Ireland, which are component parts of that union. Northern Ireland has a border with the Republic of Ireland, which it will continue, obviously, to be a member of the EU. That creates problems there. There's likely to be a second referendum. That's just on the immediate political level. Then we've got the financial meltdown. We've seen the pound go down to its lowest level for 30 years. We've seen turmoil in the markets, but we're also seeing absolute panic in the financial services industry in London, who feel that in the end they're going to lose their global primacy because they're going to be shut out from the European market, or certainly be very restricted.
Stock markets rebounded.
Yep.
Does it mean that in the end there's always some kind of a fudge and there's always some kind of a solution to everything?
I don't know. I mean, the optimists amongst those of us who voted to stay in the European Union think, number one, it was an entirely non-constitutional decision. If you can have a non-constitutional decision in a country like Britain, which doesn't have a constitution, but it certainly goes against any democratic practice in the rest of the world. You don't pull out of treaties on less than 1% of the registered vote. We hope there will be a second referendum, or at least a general election, and that general election will be fought on the issue, because it's quite clear at the moment the majority of MPs in the Parliament are against it. I mean, that's just a fact.
Both the Conservatives and the Labour Party have a lot to lose if you have a snap general election, so it looks like there probably won't be one, Anne Bagamari.
Well, it's a little hard to see how any reversal or modification of this decision to leave, which a lot of people in Britain are hoping for. They're hoping for another election. They're hoping for a do-over. It's hard to see how that's going to happen without the will of the people. One of the things I think that is making so many people so sick to their stomachs, literally, about the result of the election is that for whether or not you agreed or disagreed with the results of the vote, whether or not you agreed or disagreed with the decision of David Cameron to hold the election in the first place. And he made that decision 2 years ago when he thought he was in trouble with his own party. Whether or not you agree with any of that, this is democracy in action. The vote was held and the people spoke. And there's really, if you turn back on that and you say, oh no, well, you cut the cake a little more finely and you say this number of MPs did this and there was, the implementation is too messy and look at the results and people regret it. Look at the petitions. Everybody wants another chance at this. It doesn't work that way. Democracy is messy. And now it's time for someone to clean up the mess. The other reason I think people are really quite nauseated at what they're seeing in Britain is that if someone's going to make a decision to have a referendum and then the vote goes forward, somebody's got to take responsibility for leading the country and making sure that steps are taken to keep Britain on a solid course. And what you're seeing in the Conservative Party is the Prime Minister resigning rather than carry this through. You have a leadership battle in the Conservative Party, the majority Conservative Party, in which one of the leaders of the Leave movement, Boris Johnson, essentially looking as though he was surprised at the result, has withdrawn himself as well. You've got a messy leadership battle in that party. You've got a messy leadership battle in the main opposition Labour Party with a vote of no confidence in the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and people scrambling to figure out what the leadership of that. There's nobody in charge. And I think that is one of the things that is especially upsetting, especially if you're British.
All right, the maneuvering started a long time ago, but came to a head on what turned out to be a bloody Thursday for the ruling Conservatives. Boris Johnson pulling out of the leadership race after fellow Brexiteer Michael Gove surprised everyone.
Boris is an amazing and an impressive person. But I've realised in the last few days that Boris isn't capable of building that team and providing that unity. And so I came reluctantly but firmly to the conclusion that as someone who had argued from the beginning that we should leave the European Union, and as someone who wanted to ensure that a bold, positive vision for our future was implemented, that I had to stand for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
Aaron Zaleski, how do you interpret what you just heard?
I think a lot of people are trying to interpret it still. I mean, there's the question, did Gove push him out? There's another question, did Boris Johnson perhaps never really believe that Leave would triumph in the polls? Was it just a political maneuver to oust Cameron? And now that the chips have fallen as they have, he's sort of, oh, what do I do now? I think a lot of people are asking that question of what really is going on. Was it a matter of he just doesn't know what to do and he wanted to leave on his own, or did Gove force him out?
All right, let's give you the latest on Boris Johnson.
Okay.
He woke up to hecklers on his doorstep a week ago. You saw those images earlier. This Friday, they were still hounding him over his decision to back Brexit and then back out of the Tory leadership race. All this as reporters pursued the former mayor of London, who hasn't really explained his decision yet.
Mr. Johnson, you fought for Brexit. Aren't you responsible for implementing it?
Wouldn't have won without it.
Come on.
Abandoned the sinking ship. Hopeless.
Honestly.
Unleashed intolerance, inequality, shocking behaviour.
Mr. Johnson, aren't you responsible for implementing Brexit?
Well, that will be up to the next government.
Do you intend to play a part in that next government?
Well, that will be up to the next Prime Minister, but that can't be me, as I explained yesterday.
Do you feel betrayed by Mr. Gove?
I cannot, unfortunately, get on with doing what I wanted to do, so it'll be up to somebody else now. And I wish him every possible success.
Claude Guibal.
UK is such a drama queen. It's amazing. Really, I mean, I think what is happening now is such... You were talking about the leadership battle. It's so shocking. I mean, if I were a British voter, I mean, I'm pro-European, but some people voted for leaving, because they believe these guys who are now leaving the ship and just letting the people like that. I mean, they're just playing with politics. I mean, democracy is a serious thing. You cannot play with people. It really
Come
took
on,
the
there's a
worst.
leadership battle going on inside the Conservatives in this country, and we'll see some low blows between now and then.
Yeah, but you know, there is a question. I mean, I have a question about this chaos within the Tories in England. I'm just wondering if there is a real chaos or if they are kind of organizing the chaos.
No,
because
there is.
they were surprised by the
They're
results,
really good at it.
definitely. But now, you know, they have to be in the best position to negotiate with the EU.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. I'm.
There is real chaos, I can tell you.
Yeah.
It's genuine,
It's just
unrehearsed
amazing,
chaos.
really.
Because the point is, you know, you were dead right. Johnson didn't expect to win this, and that was the whole. The plot was to get so close that when they'd stay in the union, and then 2 years down the line, when Cameron wants his sort of plight exit from being prime minister, then there are elections, and Johnson stands up and says, I was the guy who fought against the European Union. We didn't win, but we almost won. I've got the guts to take this country forward. That was the plan. And it all went wrong because of people like Gove and Farage, who are completely fundamentalist, flat earth, anti-European Union politicians. And they meant it. And, you know, Johnson thought he could orchestrate the whole thing. It failed. And now they're stabbing each other in the back and in the front everywhere. And just as bad, the opposition Labour Party is in complete chaos as well.
And it's really so unrespectful for the British voters. I mean, the way they are playing with them, you know, the politicians, I mean, self-obsessed with their careers and ambitions. And
well, if this election, if this referendum, so-called, was about the alienation of the average person from the elites and from the ruling class, it can only have reinforced that alienation because there's total cynicism now in the country about the so-called ruling class.
Aaron Zaleski?
Right. What I was going to say is what struck me is in the immediate aftermath of the results, there was this huge uptick in Google search traffic from Britain. What is the EU? What will happen?
Yeah, but 70% of the electorate voted.
How do I get an Irish passport?
What will happen if we leave the EU? So it appears that a lot of people didn't even really understand exactly what they were voting against.
But Anne Baghamary said it was the will of the people. It's the people.
I feel like the campaign was run on fear-mongering and misinformation rather than truth. And I feel like people voted with their emotions without really understanding the ramifications.
So what do you do about it?
But there's no,
There's
nothing you can do. I mean, you can. There are probably plenty of ways out of this, but you can't ignore the fact that the people spoke, and the people have to be at the base of it.
You see,
you're going to shake your heads, but you know, if anything is done to overturn this result that does not go directly to some elected representation of the people, you're just going to reinforce everything that the Leave voters are saying, which is government doesn't listen to us. It's not for us. All these decisions are made not taking our wishes into account. You have to address that issue. And Britain is not the only country that needs to address that issue. We have a little election going on in America too. And this is very much at the core of the popularity of the presumptive Republican nominee. He's presenting a vision, and the Leave campaign presented a vision of the UK that was based probably not on facts. They started backpedaling on their promises almost the instant the votes were counted. No, we're not going to take this money and fund the NHS. And we never said that we did. Well, that was a lie. Okay, it was manipulated. The result makes everybody ill. But from there, you can't just say, well, we'll just wipe these results off and start again. There has to be a process in place to take into account what happened.
Patrick Smith, a lot of it is rage against the elites.
Yes, that's partly what was funneled very cleverly by the Leave campaign. Of course, aided by 80% of, or more, I think 85% of the British press owned by an Australian come American tycoon, Rupert Murdoch, and Lord Rothermere, who makes all his money and dumps it in a tax haven outside the country. These are the great patriots who were banging on about British sovereignty. They influenced opinion. I agree with you on the democratic issue. There has to be an election. It's not going to be one soon because both parties are in chaos. But this whole process of leaving the European Union is not going to start soon. It's not even going to start this year. Right. So I think there's plenty of time. The parties get themselves in order and they fight. It's outrageous that, as you said earlier, the people who led this campaign have now abdicated any responsibility for it on the Remain or Leave side, and they've left the burden to a new crowd who are shaky to say the least. We've got to have an election. I mean, to get basic political legitimacy. There's a huge democratic deficit in the country right now.
All right, there are
Totally
those
split.
There are those who don't want to lead, and those who don't want to go away. Jeremy Corbyn, he's so far resisting calls to step down despite mass desertions from his shadow cabinet.
Despite the overwhelming mandate that was given by Labour Party members and supporters last year, we've all had a torrid few days. Well, at least I have.
It might be in my party's interest for him to sit there. It's not in the national interest. And I would say, for heaven's sake, man, go.
For heaven's sake, man, go. Claude Guibal.
I'm watching. I'm listening. I'm speechless, really. Really. Well, as I said earlier.
But what does this say? There's the outgoing British Prime Minister saying, look, I resigned. Now you do the same thing.
And let the mess to someone else. I mean, as you say, only a general election can bring back some kind of legitimacy and stabilize the country. I mean, the image of the UK now, it's so, I mean, for us French, so weird. Really.
How much damage did Jeremy Corbyn do? Because this is a guy who went on vacation for a good part of the campaign.
Yeah.
Who campaigned, we saw him in the last week, perhaps, a little bit more front and center, but up to then we hadn't seen him much.
Yeah.
And he's marching on as though nothing happened.
Well, I mean, part of the problem was there was a bit of an honesty deficit. I mean, he clearly doesn't like the European Union, and he could have stood up and said, look, there's a leftist argument across the European Union. There's one in France against the European Union. Fine, make that argument. I mean, after all, the Conservative Party had one wing fighting against it, and most of the Conservative MPs fought for the European Union. And I think the Labour Party could have done the same. That would have then freed up the majority of the Labour Party, who favour stronger links with Europe and a functioning relationship with the European Union, to campaign much harder. And we would have had, I think, a much stronger lead. And that's part of the problem. They didn't sort that out in the Labour Party before the referendum. That would have made a difference.
I think that's absolutely right. You can talk about Jeremy Corbyn not having campaigned aggressively enough. You can talk about Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage having lied in their teeth about the results of a leave. But fact is, the Remain campaign did not make a positive case for staying in. Their argument was, if we leave, it'll be terrible, so stay. It was a negative campaign, did not do a good enough job presenting why people should vote in their way. And Leave, for all of its lies, did an excellent job scaring people into voting Leave.
Just one thing. Next Saturday in London, there will be an historic moment. For I think the first time in history, there will be a mass demonstration in favour of the European Union anywhere in the world. And of course, it's in a country that's about to leave. And but just for the record, it's there. It's happening.
And what the European Union does next is what we'll be talking about when we come back. You're watching The World This Week.